look who's come to sign the Dark Knight's death warrants. Here's your look at McFarlane Toys, DC Multiverse, DC Rebirth, Deathstroke. Slade Wilson is a mercenary and assassin for hire, with no qualms about crossing lines to get the job done, no matter where those lines are drawn. A formidable operative for the U.S. military, Colonel Slade Wilson agreed to undergo an experimental process that increased his mental and physical abilities to superhuman levels. Rather than continue his career as a soldier, Slade became the masked mercenary Deathstroke. This decision resulted in his wife leaving him and his son Joseph being permanently injured, as well as the death of his son Grant, who sought to emulate Slade. No one would dare put a price on Slade Wilson's head. Well, technically, except for McFarlane Toys, who did, of course, release this figure, and the price of Slade Wilson's head would be the same price of the rest of the body that goes along with it. It's also the same cost as all the other DC Multiverse figures we've looked at here on this channel. That being said, let's grab our tape measure just to see how tall the figure stands. We want to flip this around first to start in inches. Slade Wilson, or better known as Deathstroke, stands 7¼ inches in height, or the figure is going to be about 18½ centimeters tall. And then to compare him with other like characters, here's what he looks like with another DC Rebirth figure, this being Batman. I would have suspected that they would have been of the same size, but as you can clearly see, though, Deathstroke here is a tad bit taller than Bruce Wayne here to his left. And another Deathstroke that we also looked at here on this channel, though a long time ago, here's what he also looks like next to the Arkham City Deathstroke. Though very completely different design costumes, they do share very similar elements with one another. If you do count the trading card, then Deathstroke does technically come with 4 things. The first thing, of course, we will have a look at is the already mentioned trading card. And once again, we are treated here to figure photography. The costume from the DC Rebirth does get altered slightly depending on the pages in which you read him from. In this case, actually, they've got the coil, the chainmail armor that he has there on the side of his arm. This figure does not have it. And in many of the designs of the DC Rebirth Deathstroke, he doesn't have it either. But still, I really love the artwork that they would have used here for the card. The back does tell us, of course, that Slade Wilson, as if we didn't already know that. Quite a substantial read-up, too. Now, if that's too much to read, too much of a bearing to bear, then don't worry. That's also something I read at the beginning of this video. It is? You didn't just pull this from the top of your head? No, I didn't. That's inside my head. I didn't pull it from the top of my head. Top of my head, it has hair. Anyways, let's move that to the side. Figure also comes included with a display stand. It's a darker display stand in this case. And the only reason why I say that is just to compare it. Some of the plastics I've noticed have changed with the display stands. Every once in a while, you'll get this lighter colored black display stand. And in other cases, like Deathstroke here, you get a darker black. I'm not sure. Maybe they're just changing the plastics every once in a while. The DC logo still is printed down below here. And then once again, up in the corner, one standalone peg that can attach to the underside of Slade Wilson's feet. You can move that to the side. Figure then comes included with 2 things for weapons. The smaller of the 2, the figure comes included with a tiny little hunting knife. The knife itself nicely looks good, done here in a dark kind of gunmetal gray. It's not sharp to the touch. It's a fairly thick blade too, so I don't know what it's really going to be able to cut. Maybe it might be able to slice through butter. Maybe even through butter, it might have a hard time. And of course the handle is all here done in a molded black plastic. This can fit into his hands. He has, at least to his credit, 2 gripping hands, so you can actually have him wielding both the things he comes included with. Simply just take the knife, put it into his hand. Might want to have it making sure, of course, the blade is facing outward. That's not going to be doing much cutting at all. Or what you can also do, too, is you can take the knife and then holster it here to the side of his leg. Just take the knife and slide it right in there. It's tight quarters, though, and when you are putting it in, you feel as if you're probably going to have a harder time to remove it, but it does fit inside of his leg. The other thing that Deathstroke does have, guns? No guns. For anybody who was yelling in the back, they wanted to see guns. What he does come included with at least is a sword. It's a rather interesting sword. I would imagine this would be hard to grab, just because, again, when you look at the guard does protect the hands at least, but I would imagine it'd be hard to still get your hand in there if you want to quickly draw this from the back of your torso. Again, this does fit into his hands. What's to note, though, on Deathstroke is is that they've teased you with actually pointing fingers or trigger firing fingers. And yet again, being the mandate, they can include guns with the figure. So it does fit again into his hand. You can again have the knife on this side. You can have the sword on this side. You can swap them around as well. Nobody's committing you to the idea it has to be over here. Or what you can also do too is that you can holster it on the back of Slade's body. Right here you can see it's not so much a sheath as it is basically just a peg. This sort of C-clamp, what it is. You really don't want to be sliding it from the top. Normally, you would just assume that you'd slide the sword down. But what ends up happening is it gets tight and stops to about here. And then you're going to have this awkward-looking sword that sticks out the top. Rather, instead, just unsheath it, slide it in, or just sort of wedge it in here, in between like this part of the hourglass. I'm kind of describing it as an hourglass shape. If you fit it right in there, then the sword is of a proper length, and it doesn't awkwardly stick out the back of his body. For the rest of this review, I'm just going to leave this off, just because I know when I get to the articulation of Deathstroke, it's going to be harder for me, of course, to rotate the torso if a big honkin' sword is sticking out his back. Getting a closer look, though, at Slade. One of my favorite designs of Deathstroke is the one from DC Rebirth. They sort of took the concept of Slade Wilson's armor, and they've streamlined it. Doing away with, obviously, some of the blue, doing away with, of course, the chainmail that he has on his arm, leaving behind the more calling cards of what the character is, more the half and half face. The one side is all black, with no pupil visible, and then the other side does have the very bright orange, something that even Aquaman would be envious of. I do like the way they've done the eye. The eye, though, is a little small, or maybe perhaps it's not bright enough. So further away, you almost have a harder time to be able to spot the eye. Maybe if they could have made the eye just a slight bit bigger or a slight bit brighter, although I don't know how much. I guess they probably could make it a little bit whiter than what we get right here. The sculpting to the face is fantastic. And with cases before, you also got the little bandana that sticks out the back of his head. Now, the thing about the bandana, though, is it's tiny little threads of plastic. So you will want to be careful when you are moving the head back and forth. And certainly will want to be careful as well when you're drawing the sword out that you don't actually pull these in the process, as they would very easily detach from the back of the figure's head sculpt. I love the idea that they would have still included that. Talking, though, about Aquaman, though, look at the actual chainmail that he has here on the side of his body. A very bright orange, a classic-looking Aquaman color. I think even in the comics it's a little bit darker than what we get right here, but at the very least, it's a very bright, well-painted body, a well-painted side of his body that continues on, of course, onto the shoulders before we get a smooth sleeve of white before it actually wraps up in the orange color again. The one thing that, unfortunately, though, is omitted here on this figure, talking a little bit about the idea that he can't come included with guns, is in many of the cases when it comes to DC Rebirth, he does actually have a little holster here in many of the comics where he's actually got a holstered pistol. Now, he doesn't have, unfortunately, a pistol, but I thought at the very least they probably could have had a little holster on the side of his leg. It wouldn't necessarily impeded any of figure's articulation because, of course, his knee's down here, his thigh's up here. We all know what anatomy looks like. But I think they probably could have still put a holster there for the eventual release down the road. Of course, they're releasing, of course, the weapons pack too. So even if you didn't have a gun, at least if they had put a holster in there, because I think in most of the time, the comics, he does have one here on the side of his leg. But still nicely bright there in the orange. The paint, very little of it. Most of his body is actually kind of this dark. I don't even want to even say black. It's a very dark gray. The colors really work quite well. What little color we actually get here. Pockets, like for example, in the orange, are well painted. The little belt buckle here in the front, which I don't think is actually in the comic. I think in the comic he actually has panel lining that gun runs sort of in the middle. And that this is sort of not a bridge necessarily between the two neighboring pockets. But actually instead this is usually, I think, open just in the middle. But that's okay. I still like the look of the belt buckle here. The pockets, again, well painted. Very brightly orange. It looks like there's almost a section where he could actually sheath a secondary dagger, a secondary knife, but there obviously isn't one included. But overall, like again, a nice looking figure. There's nothing really I would have necessarily changed to him. Maybe they probably could have added a little bit of wash necessarily to some of the orange parts just to kind of darken them up a little bit. But overall, one of the best, if not the best, Deathstroke figures that we've gotten from McFarlane's team. When it comes to the articulation for this guy, again, we're going to be very careful to the threads on the back of his mask, so the head does rotate technically all the way around. And, of course, the head does look up. It looks up a lot higher than I expected it to be. It does look also quite down, a lot further than I also expected. And the head also does rock back and forth as well. Shoulders do come out. I would comfortably say at a 90-degree angle bend. You can take those arms and rotate them all the way around. And not to be fair, obviously do be fair, giving a little attention to the other side, you can also rotate this arm also all the way around as well. The biceps do swivel. And I did notice with this figure that everything is really tight on the figure. Sometimes there might be one thing I point out, like this shoulder could have been a little tighter, but it's certainly not super loose. And that's certainly important. The figure does have a double hinge on the elbow. The figure also does have a swivel or rotation in the hands, which also does serve as a little bit of a rock back and forth as well. The upper torso is on a ball joint. And would you also believe if I was to tell you that he'd have a lower torso abdomen area too? You should believe me. He does. He actually does rotate all the way around on a ball joint there too. Legs themselves seem to be once again using the ratcheted joints, so you can hinge the legs, getting a very good splits, in fact, on Deathstroke. You take the legs and move them forward. You can move them back. You can also slightly swivel at the top of the thigh, more really the way it was just assembled in the factory, but the figure has at least a double hinge on the knee, and he does have ankle pivot. I said really that all the figure's joints are pretty tight. I suppose if anything, he has a little bit of a looseness here in the one knee, but certainly not something that's going to cause this figure to topple over time. If anything, I would probably even say like the ankles, I might even want to just heat these up just a little bit. This one's not so bad. This one, as you can probably see, sits a little bit more on an angle, so I might just want to heat that up just a little bit with a hairdryer. But still overall, a nice looking Deathstroke. Could he come include with guns? No. Unfortunately, he can't. But I think one thing I would have at least included with this figure is a holster on the side of his leg. Even if he didn't have a pistol to go inside the holster, just because, well, again, when I see him in the comics, usually for DC Rebirth, a lot of the times the suit does have the holster on the side of his leg, which clearly, as you can see, got omitted. They may have even omitted it because they knew they couldn't include a pistol, so there was no sense to tease you, like they did with the trigger-firing hand, tease you with a holster that unfortunately a pistol would not sit inside. Here's again what he looks like along with the DC Rebirth Batman. Again, a nice-looking Batman. But again, like when you're looking at them, I really do again like the idea that Deathstroke in this case is a little bit taller than Bruce Wayne. You wouldn't want them to be of the same size. And it certainly does break the concept that you always have to have the same mold being reused countless times already. With another brand, another company, and another toy line dealing with superheroes, a lot of time the system norm is always to be, the company norm at least to be, is always to reuse those molds as much as they can. McFarlane isn't really doing that. Occasionally you may get yourself the gold label editions. Obviously they're going to be reusing a little bit of the mold that they can, but a lot of times you're getting brand new molds each and every time. That's one of the reasons why Deathstroke is taller than Bruce Wayne here. That's one of all the reasons why I like collecting this line so much. While my Arkham City Deathstroke has been predominantly displayed with all the recently looked at Arkham City figures we've gotten from McFarlane's team, sadly though, no love has really been given to the DC Multiverse stuff. We finally at least have ourselves the DC Rebirth Deathstroke to be displayed along with the previously looked at DC Rebirth Batman and all the rest of the DC Multiverse figures we looked at here on this channel. And I gotta say, like, for the one that they chose, this is what I feel to be one of the better looks for Deathstroke. The look is streamlined on his suit, and yet there's still enough recognizable to him that you know right away who he is. The calling card, of course, for Deathstroke, the biggest one being the half-and-half mask that he has. And I do like the way they've handled the bright orange on the one side of his face and muting the colors in that darker grayish black on the other side of his face. Granted, his eye isn't very visible. It doesn't help that it's so small in the figure's head sculpt, but also as well, I don't think it's super bright of a white that they used. Maybe if they have just jacked the brightness of the white just a little bit lighter, then maybe the eye would have stood out a little bit more than what it does. Now, obviously, the real elephant in the room is the fact that Deathstroke, being an assassin, doesn't come included with any firearms. Now, we get the whole idea that they can't use firearms when it comes to the releasing of their figures. They're going to be separately, standalone releasing the armor packs, like the weapons packs. So there's always that option to go with. But if you want to get this guy straight out of the packaging, you're going to be disappointed that he doesn't have any guns whatsoever because, of course, guns, pew, 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 make those noises, and they also kill and hurt people. But you got to think as well, a big long sword like this, you got to imagine he's sharpening all the time. And a small little hunting knife for stabby action is still just as damaging, just as destructive, maybe more closer range. But I would imagine that that would still be something that is a no-no when it comes to displaying or releasing a figure and packaging with. And yet Deathstroke can get a sword, can't get a hunting knife, but he can't get himself a couple of pew-pew guns. I'm not even sure what that's all about. One thing also I did mention in this review, and I'll just reiterate here, well, he does have the holster there lower on his calf to hold the hunting knife. Sadly, he doesn't have a holster on the side of his leg to hold a pew-pew pistol. I'm going to stop calling it pew-pew pistols. But at least if he had that if I could find myself a pistol, maybe from the Red Hood or something like that, which I'm probably going to be ultimately doing. I have a couple of Red Hoods in my collection that have still guns. I'm probably going to just ultimately display here with Deathstroke, but I do wish at least he could have had a holster on the side of his leg, not for a gun he could have come included with, but for at least a gun that we probably could have found in our collection from earlier released McFarlane toy figures. But what do you guys think, though, of the DC Rebirth Slade Wilson, or aka Deathstroke? Pretty nice looking figure. And are you certainly disappointed as well, the fact that still with these figures we can't get guns, pew pew or otherwise? Let me know your thoughts down below, what you guys think of the gun mandate and the reasoning why McFarlane Toys can't include guns. Other companies can. Unfortunately, though, we have yet to really see any of these figures get released with actual pistols. Again, it's a bit disappointing. Also, if you enjoyed this video, want to hit with a like. If you're loving the content you guys are seeing and do certainly want to stick around for more, then make sure you're hitting the crucial things like the subscribe button down below. The crucial things like turning on the bell notification. And of course, the biggest one, the crucial thing, making sure that you're coming back here regularly. Also popping up at the very end of this video would be a playlist of other things I've looked at for DC Multiverse, and more importantly, other things I've also looked at for McFarlane Toys. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.